Well, I want to welcome you all to the beginning of the new lecture series, a series we have every fall. Each fall we pick a country to focus on. In the past we've dealt with China and India and Brazil. My name's Chris Hayes. I'm professor of anthropology here and chair of the lectures committee. Actually, I am the lectures committee this year, but in any case, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So this year, again, our theme is France, and we're actually what we try to do with the college here is to have lots of events associated with that. One of which is tonight, the first lecture is always the Matt Zillig lecture series, sponsored by the Matt Zillig citizenship group, and they are asking me to make sure that you know that there are some wonderful French treats over that they've been preparing right next door here, and that's why we have this particular one here in the theater here. So please, right after the lecture, there'll be wine and treats and so forth, French treats to eat. This particular lecture is sponsored by the Matt Zillig Society and the Timmers Resort as well. And there's going to be a wine tasting and also a dinner that's going to be October 26th that the foundation, the Washington County Foundation is sponsoring. And it's a great event where you can get a wonderful meal and also provide money for scholarships. Back to the Matt Zillig. Matt Zillig was somebody who lived in the West Bend community but considered himself to be a global citizen. And he traveled around the world, and one of the things that we really want to emphasize with this lecture series is thinking about global citizenship. And one of the things that they do, in addition to sponsoring this this particular lecture, they also sponsor a scholarship, and I'm also on the scholarship committee, and they have a global citizenship scholar that we pick out of the students every year, and so and particularly these days that's a very important thing to be doing. So what we have from besides tonight's lecture, they'll be every Wednesday, but the rest of them will be in room 201, the lecture hall that's just kind of down the hall. A number of you have been there before. On October 2nd, we will have Associate Professor of French, Laurence Cupieux, who will be talking about French culture and food. On the October 9th, we're actually going to have a roundtable that should be quite interesting on French firms doing business in Wisconsin. So we have the French American Chamber of Commerce executive director is going to be leading that, and we're going to have so please come to that one. On October 16th, we are going to have a speaker talking about the French criminal justice system, so that should also be very interesting. And then finally, we're going to end up with the underbelly of Impressionism. So that's on art, so that should be a great one as well. All right, so tonight's speaker we're very honored to have, is the Consulate General of France in Chicago. He became the Consulate General in France on August 29th, 2017, and he oversees the relationships between France and the 13 U.S. Midwestern states. Guillaume Lacroix holds diplomas from the Institute of Political Studies and the Law School of the University of Paris, and he speaks Swahili, a language he studied at the Institute of Oriental Languages and Civilizations in Paris, and in the field on the islands of Zanzibar in East Africa. He started his diplomatic career in 1997, and he was assigned to the Bureau of of African Affairs, then to the French embassies in Dar es Salaam, in Tanzania, and in Washington, D.C. He's also posted in two other diplomatic institutions at the U.S. State Department as part of the Transatlantic Diplomatic Fellow Program and at the European External Action Service in Brussels. And from 2013 until 2017, he served in the cabinets of the French Foreign Affairs ministers as counselor for African Affairs. He was born in Burgundy in 1971, and he's married and has 2 children. And again, we're very honored and pleased that he's going to be our first speaker tonight. So, you'll...
Thank you, Chris. Bonsoir. On parle français ce soir. Oui. Wisconsin. It's really a pleasure to be here and an honor to talk about my favorite subject, not France, but France and America. My name is Guillaume Lacroix, last name that is pretty popular in Wisconsin, I hear. I also drink water. And I am the kind of persons who tend to spell Wisconsin O-U-I. For some reasons, historic reasons. And actually France and Wisconsin, as many of you know, have a lot in common. I was in the Twin Cities yesterday until this morning, and my assistant and I, we drove through Wisconsin, and it's impossible to count all the places that have French names here. Imagine a map of Wisconsin without the French and native names. What would be left? West Bend, maybe? But we have a lot in common in history, in the past, in the present, in the future, and I will get to that. We also have, I believe, a common passion about a thing when it comes to food stuff. Cheese. Wisconsin is the other cheese country. I'm not saying the best or number 1 and second. I'm not taking side here because I'm a diplomat, but the other cheese country. So thank you very much for coming out in numbers. I'm really honored to have been invited. I want to thank Chris and the university and the Zelig Foundation. I think this initiative of bringing the world to West Bend is wonderful. I'm sure many of you have traveled around the globe, and tonight my objective is not to convince to come to France. It is to come again to France. But we are global citizens, and there is no age to be and become a global citizen. I'm saying this because I've visited a number of schools in the Midwest. Yesterday in the Twin Cities, not too long ago in Milwaukee. Public schools that teach young children in a foreign language. It is called Immersion. One of the most successful schools of that kind is called the French Immersion Public School in Milwaukee. It's been around for more than 40 years. It's been in service for more than 40 years now. And it is extremely impressive for me, who I am a native speaker of my language, to see these American children learning maths and science in French. Not only they become very fast, very quickly fluent speakers in French, but they also perform well in the tests. So it's not a problem to, at this age, to learn a curriculum, American curriculum, Wisconsin curriculum in a second language. It's not a problem. Not only you learn the language, but you perform better. And I think that's wonderful news for the world. Because if our children not only learn foreign language, but at a young age are exposed to different cultures, different ideas, different perspectives, it's good for peace. It's good for understanding. Diplomacy is about mutual understanding. Peace is about mutual understanding. But if we want to understand one another, even if we don't speak the same language, we need to be able to listen and to learn from the others. This is what I'm trying to do as a diplomat here. I'm not an educator, I'm not a teacher, I'm just a French person who happens to represent his country, his president, his people in a big country, America, in a country that is our oldest ally. And France is America's oldest ally. I don't have to make a history lesson. You will know that. If I say Lafayette, okay, we understand. And that's one of the beauties of the special relationship between France and America, is that we don't necessarily agree on everything, but when it comes to the essential, when it comes to our security, when it comes to our values, when it comes to our children, we trust each other. And this has been the case since your independence. And your independence was the inspiration for our revolution. The Declaration of Human Rights and Citizen that was proclaimed in 1789 was very, very much, if not a copycat, but very much inspired by the Declaration of Independence. And Benjamin Franklin and the fathers of independence spent times in France. Jefferson was not only a Francophile, he was also a very good wine critic. He wrote about Bordeaux. And this has been the case throughout the 19th century. And what America did for France, for Europe, for free Europe, in the 20th century is something that is invaluable to us. And the debt that we, the French, owe you is a debt that we will never be able to repay in full. A little more than a century ago, in 1917, American soldiers, Darth boys, girls came and ended the war. It was necessary to end the war. And while you came to fight, you also brought your culture with you. It's since the First World War that jazz became popular in France. And there are so many stories around that. I was not too long ago in Chicago. This is where my office is located. And I know that at the Du Sable Museum, another French connection, Du Sable Museum of African American history, they have an amazing collection of letters written by men in uniform who served in World War I, African Americans who wrote so eloquently about France and the French people. Many of them served in the French army. They were given weapons, which was not very common here. And this is an additional connection between our two people. And in 1944, 75th anniversary this year, your parents, your grandparents, your uncles stormed the beaches of Normandy, and you change the destiny of France forever. Being the Consul General, being the representative of the French government, I have the opportunity to thank World War II veterans in the Midwest for their service in France. Last year, not actually this year, it was in last July, I came to King, Wisconsin, at the veterans home there, to bestow our highest distinction, the French Legion of Honor, on Mr. Robert Rigel for his service in France. Mr. Rigel passed last week. He was 100 years old. But I'm mentioning him because what we owe him has no price. And freedom comes at a price. He risked everything for you and for us. The bridge over the Atlantic is there to stay forever. And I was glad to be able to thank Mr. Rigel before it was too late. It's always late, and it was very late, but it was not too late. And last week, Mr. Gene Schulz, 95 years old, he's younger, and he's in very, very good shape, went to France. He's from the Milwaukee area. I met him 3 weeks ago at the Alliance Française of Milwaukee. He was a special guest of the city of Chartres, the city that has one of the most beautiful cathedrals, not only in France, in Europe. Was a special guest of the city of Chartres because Mr. Schulz was one of the saviors of Chartres and the cathedral. He was the typist of a colonel who died in August or September of 1944. And 75 years later, he was honored with the Medal of the French Legion of Honor. I'm happy to share the story with you because it's a very, very beautiful story. You may wonder what a Consul General does. What is a Consul General? What is an ambassador? What is a diplomat? To make a long story short, I am a foreign service officer. I'm a career diplomat, as Chris very nicely mentioned. I have been a member of the French Foreign Service since 1997. And basically, my job here is to represent France, to lead the French community, the individuals who have French citizenship. It can be dual citizenship, triple citizenship. And my office and I try to provide the best service possible to them. There are so many services that are not provided by the consulates, but if they need to renew their passport, their IDs, we even organize elections. When there are elections in France, we have the right to have polling stations in limited locations for the French people to come and vote. If a French citizen happens to be in trouble with the police or the justice, it's not for us to interfere. But we have, and it's a diplomatic tradition. We have an access to the person. We can speak to the person, make sure that his or her family back in France has all the information. We can assist with, advising with a lawyer. It's called consular protection. But it is just only one aspect of my job and the job of all my colleagues in Chicago or elsewhere, or my American colleagues in France, who do the same in Paris, in Strasbourg, in Rennes, in Marseille. But the other aspect of my mission is really to promote trade and investment between my area, the Midwest, and France. And it's as you all know, it's a two-way street. very much enjoy it when French companies can do business here, and there are many French companies who are located in Wisconsin and do business, and sometimes startups and newcomers come to offer their services, their products, their expertise. But likewise, we very much welcome American investments in France. America has been in the past 2 years, when I say America, I mean American companies, have been the number one investors if you compare with countries of origin of other new companies that are coming. So America has become number one, and Germany is number two, and Germany has been for a long time number one. And the French are investing more and more in the United States as well. In 2017, I haven't seen the figures of 2018, the country of origins of new investments that created jobs, especially in the manufacturing sector in America, is France. And I am saying this, one, to share good news, but also to highlight an aspect of our relations that maybe we don't think of too often. We think of our history, we think of our military, strong military alliance, we think of our two presidents meeting, but we don't necessarily think of business. And actually business is very big, and it's getting bigger and bigger. Because I think American companies recognize that France is not only a country of good wine and cheese, but it's also a country of innovation, a country where the training of engineers is recognized worldwide, and where, despite some of the bad news that we hear from France sometimes with the violences, the yellow vest movement, the strikes, still we remain a very, very productive country. And a country that is one of the gateway to Europe, and in the context of Brexit, the relevance of France is probably been elevated, and we welcome that. So my job is also to go and meet companies that have their headquarters in, say, Wisconsin. I don't need to say all the big companies that you have here, because you know them, and I know that probably a majority of them, or nearly a majority of them, are either already present in France, running operations and employing French people, or are thinking of being present. The third aspect of my mission is to promote cultural education and scientific relations. The Midwest has an incredible amount of companies present here, but also universities. And I want to be able to say, when I leave this job in 2 years from now, maybe later, but we'll see, that I have been able to, not to do, but to contribute to raising the number of students from this region who go on a study abroad program to France. If possible, 1 semester, 2 semesters, if not a shorter period. We want to attract students to France. They need to see how we are, how we live, to make their own mind. And when they come back, if they come back, they will act as a bridge between our communities, our countries. And they will be the best ambassadors of the French-American relations. Its experience speaks volume about it. It's not about conversion. We are not asking the young Americans to come and change their citizenship or the way they think, the way they are. But we believe in that in exchanging young people, we are better off on both sides of the Atlantic. And of course, it's extremely strategic for France to invest in American students, because you are a bigger country than we do, and our relations are very good, very confident, but we should not see it as a given. America's greatest generation, they are not all gone, but they are in the process of being gone, and so the memory hopefully will be kept. But this phase of the 40s and the Reconstruction, the Cold War, it's in the past now. So we have collectively, I think, to reinvent and find new ways of being connected, and we hope on the French side a very special relationship between our two countries. There are very good examples of cooperation between our universities. University of Madison-Milwaukee has a lot of connection with France. Madison the same, but we want to do even more. And when it comes to science, I have in my office a scientific attaché and a deputy who are completely, totally dedicated to scientific partnerships. I know nothing about science. I study political science. That's maybe my only connection with science. But still, I think I am able to connect with leaders in the medicine, cancer research. It's not too difficult. We just need to find ways to trust each other, to see how we can help them connect, and then my job is done, and that's for them to build and develop partnerships. So that's the job of a consul or consul general. I'm appointed by the French president, but I am not a political appointee, so I do not depend on political cycles. And in the United States, there is one ambassador, French ambassador, Italian ambassador, British ambassador, based in Washington, D.C., the capital. But since America is a big power, there is maybe one political capital, but there are so many big cities where it's important for us to be present and to work with you. I mentioned the French community, maybe just one figure. The French community that is under the responsibility of the consulate, it's 25,000 people. Half of them are actually registered with the consulate, but the other half is not. And it's not a problem. It's not mandatory to be registered, but we believe that this number should be multiplied by 2. And here in Wisconsin, I believe the number is 1,400, something like that, I believe. We are receiving the assistance of French citizens or American citizens or even German citizens who act as honorary consul. There are people who, pro bono, for free, they are the official representative, but it's not their profession, of the consul in the cities, in the states. And here in Chicago, from Chicago, we have a network of 10 honorary consul. And what I found when I came to Chicago 2 years ago was that we have one honorary consul in Kentucky, we have one in Indiana, we have 2 in Ohio, but 0 in Wisconsin. How come? I think the reason is that Milwaukee and Madison and West Bend are not too close, but not too far from Chicago. And there is a tendency in Chicago to consider, and bad tendency, that, you are part of our network. I'm not saying periphery, but, and we need to change that. We need to change that. Wisconsin is a very important state economically, politically, was very important in 2016, and maybe even more important in 2018. I heard, as you all have, that in July in Milwaukee, one of the 2 conventions will take place. We need France to be more present here. And I have convinced my government to appoint an honorary consul of France in Wisconsin. We haven't made the selection yet, but we have good candidates to elevate a little bit the relations between France and Wisconsin. I think I need to speak more about France. You follow the news. You know that in 2017 we had an election. I will keep the story very short. And President Macron was elected. I think a person who has been immediately in the world news as maybe the new leader of Europe. This came after a series of electoral unprecedented election, I think, and results. Brexit, that really came as a shock in Europe and in the Western world. The 2016 elections in America, which were unconventional, I believe, and maybe the scenario could not be written in advance. And I remember back in 2017 in France that many pundits in France, but probably more outside France, predicted that after Trump election, after Brexit election, France will be the new country, old democracy, with a populist movement or a populist wave. And the person that was identified as the populist leader, Marine Le Pen, should be the winner, should be the victor. And Mr. Macron, a young, very bright, very intelligent, very promising person, would maybe be a serious contender in the elections of 2022, but not 2017. And you saw what happened. Another electoral result that was not predicted, that came a little bit as a surprise, not in the last weeks of the elections, but 6 months before the election. It would have been considered a surprise. But the platform on which President Macron ran was very different from the so-called populist platform. It's more a free trade, free economy, reformer, pro-EU agenda. Not a mainstream agenda, but a moderate, with good ideas from the left and good ideas from the right. So that's pretty conventional. What was not conventional is that he had never run for a public office before. Most of the people with him were not holding offices. And in the parliamentary elections that followed the presidential election, the wave unfolded, but not the populist wave, the Macron wave. Nearly 45, maybe 50% of women elected to parliament, which is, I hope we will set a good example for America. And more than 70, I think, maybe 80 newcomers in the parliament. So big change. The question was how far will Mr. Macron go in reforming the economy, changing the society, in maybe changing the mentalities. I don't like to hear that because it's not a problem of mentality and we are who we are. But sometimes changing a little bit the practices and the mindset. And as always, because we are democratic countries, even if the president has a lot of powers according to our constitution, was well elected, it's not one person who can change everything. One, because France is a country that is part of the European Union and very much depending on the European economy, the economic growth, our relations with Germany, but also because we are a country that has a big debt. And so whatever you want to do, first you have to pay your dues at the end of the month. So this has been a problem for France, not to pay. It's okay because the interest rates are low and there is confidence with the future of the economy, but it's a problem because you have to manage a deficit and to lower taxes and to lower and to cut spendings. And I think Mr. Macron has been successful in passing very, very important economic reforms. The labor code was transformed, a new energy was injected, and I think the private companies and the economic circles, in particular in America, recognize that. At the same time, another development that was not foreseen, and I think no one predicted that, very grassroots, in a way spontaneous, and unfortunately too often violent movement, les gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, was started in several cities, not only in Paris, at the end of last year in France. And it took weeks before the situation calmed down a little bit. The police had to adapt its strategy because the movement was very, very violent. And it took weeks for the president to retake the initiative and help settle a little bit not the full situation, but make the environment more conducive for dialogue. And he started an initiative called the National Dialogue, le Débat National, for him to listen, to engage, to meet, and he spent hours and hours and hours in town hall meetings. And it's probably helped many people understand that maybe the movement went a little bit too far and too long. I'm not here to say that the claims were not all illegitimate. The claim for social justice, the claim for lower taxes are legitimate. But there are different ways to address that. So we're trying to collectively, I think, to go over it and find a way to listen more to the population. In particular, what we call here and in France and in other countries, the lower middle classes, the people who fight, work hard to reach the end of the month, who don't necessarily have the luxury of thinking of the 20 years ahead. They just have to pay their bills every month. And many of these people were raised in the conviction that they probably would live better than their parents, as their parents lived better than their grandparents. And since 20 years, it's no longer the case. It's not working anymore. And more, in particular in the young generation, there are people who feel that their life will be more difficult. So it kind of raises a sense of not nihilism, but less optimism toward the future. But I've seen that here as well, and it was probably one of the motivations for the Brexiters as well, the sense that we are losing control. What are they doing in the big in the big cities, in the palace, in the banks? What about me? And I believe the Gilets jaunes is the French expression of this. The French people can be very passionate about politics and social issues, and a lot of passion. But this kind of expression was expressed, that's my personal view, in the votes in Great Britain and United States by the same kind of people. But it's just that the ways of expression were different. The irony is that when French people vote, they are very reasonable in their votes in 2017 and this year. In June, in the context of the Yellow Vest movement, elections took place in France as they took place in Europe. And again, the vote was not particularly different from prior elections, with a good performance of President Macron's party, good performance of Marine Le Pen, but it seems that not a single party could really take advantage of this Yellow Vest movement. Interesting development. The Yellow Vest movement took place in many cities without one single day of strike. Many people think the French people, whenever they are, unhappy, they go on strike. That's not true. The Yellow Vest had demonstration every Saturday, not a working day. Why, I don't know. But I believe it has to do with the fact that the movement was not created by trade unions, but rather, was started on Facebook, which has some positive aspects and not so positive aspects. We have seen with this anger, popular anger, unfortunately, too many very bad statements, comments on Facebook. Racist, anti-Semitic, conspiracy theories by so-called leaders of the Yellow Vest who are, just writing what goes through their mind. And that's a problem because everyone should be taken accountable for what he or she says and accountable of the consequences of what you say. And another worrying development with the movement is that, according to some studies, the media that was seen as the most trustworthy by the Gilets jaunes, the sympathizers of the Gilets jaunes, was not the Journal Sentinel of Milwaukee or not the New York Times, but Russia Today. Russia Today and Sputnik. And the thing is, I think many people who check the websites of Russia Today or our Facebook followers, they don't even know it's Russia Today. They see RT, okay, they say RT, like we have RTL, RT. And that raises a number of questions about the distrust, unfortunately, of the French, some, not all, but some people in France with their own media, but also the motives of Russia Today to pinpoint all the cracks in the French societies. Do they have an agenda? I'm leaving the question open. So we need to be very cautious about that. And that is one of the lessons we have to take. I probably would stop here. I don't want to end on a note of skepticism. I'm very optimistic by nature, but also we believe in the strength of the French society. One of the things that makes me optimistic about my country is that I was in Paris in 2015 when the first terrorist attack took place in January against the newspaper Charlie Hebdo. And 2 days later, millions of people were taking the streets, and people of all backgrounds, all affiliations, all denominations saying, no, you are not going to scare us, you are not going to divide us. And again, in November of 2015, the horrific attacks at the Stade de France and at the Bataclan, and still the French society, despite the cracks, yes, there are cracks, despite the problems, despite many problems, we want to stay together, and we are ready to face all the bad people on the planet who are threatening us. We are united. And we need to be united for world peace. We need to be united to fight the big challenges of our time and to take the challenges. And climate is, of course, number one challenge for you and for us, for all generations. We need to be probably more ambitious, to be more realistic, and I hope more resolute. This is one of the area where Europe and the United States differ. Europe has been very united, very committed to climate change, as many other countries on the planet. But this has been my experience so far in the Midwest, in the 13 states, or the 12 states on the Midwest and Kentucky, is that despite the political disputes or the political nuances or differences, it seems to me that people are united to act. You may differ on coal, you may differ on wind energy or with some nuances, but there is consensus that we need to act. So let's act together, and let's be confident that our relations is there to stay, to live, and to thrive. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion and conversation with you if you have questions. Thank you.
So if there are any questions, I'll bring the mic to you. Oh.
I don't think I need a microphone.
Well,
Your healthcare system is the envy of the world, and I wonder if you would just describe it a bit to us.
Our healthcare system is the envy of the world. Yes, but the French don't know that. The French who live in France, who don't travel outside France, don't know that. I'm sure there are some things that could be improved or bettered. But I agree with you, sir. The cost of healthcare in France, compared with the quality of the service, is amazing. I wonder what we have managed to do here and that you have not been able to do here, there and here in the United States. It has to do with the cost, I believe, because the quality here is very good. 2 days ago, or no, end of last week, I referred earlier to the, scientific partnership or exchange between university. Workshop was organized by University of Chicago with academics from Sciences Po in France, and one of the topic was healthcare. I haven't seen their conclusions yet, but I'm very curious to see how the debate will develop in the context of the 2020 elections, because I know it's an important motivation for voters. And I hear in the Democratic primaries that it may be number 1 or number 2 topic, and all candidates have plans. Some have radical plans. We are here to help. If anyone wants to consult us, we are at their disposal, both Democrats and Republicans. But thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, actually, as just a follow-up, could you describe the system? I mean, if somebody got sick somewhere, anywhere in the country.
Well, if you get sick, you don't have to pay anything. You pay, but you don't pay. So you don't have to make the advance for regular consultation. If you go to a hospital, normally you don't have to disperse anything, whatever the operation or surgery is, or the situation. Of course, it does not come for free because people pay social dues every month. There are people who pay more than others. It's called la redistribution. And the doctors earn good money in France. They are not poor. But basically, the funding system works pretty well with a basic principle is that the rich people pay more every month than poor people. But it's for everyone. One of the key divide, it seems here, is about so-called universal healthcare. In France, there is no debate, but it's universal, period.
Any other questions?
Monsieur, being a French citizen, probably the closest neighbor to England, you do a lot of commerce with them. As a French citizen, not as a diplomat, what is your opinion about Brexit? And what economic impact do you think it's going to bring to France?
Thank you. I speak as a diplomat and as a French citizen on this and on other topics. They will regret it. They will regret it because it's a lose-lose situation. But the country that will lose the most is the United Kingdom. And it's not me saying this, it's the Scots, the Welsh, and many people in England. But it's democracy. And I think that if there is not another vote, it is important to implement the sovereign and popular decision of the British people. In my country, a referendum was held in 2005. It was not about leaving or remaining, but it was about a new European treaty. And the majority of French people voted no, but still there was some, and we are not the only ones. The Dutch voted no, the Irish voted no, and still there was a decision by the European Union to find a way, with a new treaty, revised treaty, but keeping the bulk of the new proposals to go on. And now I think many people in France recognize it was a mistake not to respect in full the popular vote. So it would be an additional problem if EU would try to delay or to undo the Brexit votes. But one thing is very important for us as the EU, because you have seen that the EU has been very united, actually. There is not one crack between the 27 other member states. We are united because we don't want to be to lose even more. So, unfortunately, I should say, the British people need to take responsibility and find a way to live decently Europe, because if there is not an agreement, it will be the so-called hard Brexit, and we will lose even more. When I say we lose, I mean the business will be disrupted. The prospect of economic developments and growth in Great Britain are not so bright. So it has an impact on us because they are good customers. It's a problem for our wine producers. It's a problem for many industries in France. And also given that a lot of the trade go through Calais and Dover, we will be with the Belgians very, very much impacted. And again, not forgetting the impact that is going to have on Scotland. It's a very interesting situation, sometimes a little bit matter of, interrogation. We need to follow that closely as well.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Bonsoir, monsieur. I have a question about increasing French and American relations, as you talked about before. I am a French teacher here in West Bend, and I take students to France every 2 years, and French students come here as part of an exchange that I have set up independently that's been going for 20 years. So I think we're trying in the high school to make those connections, but I've noticed in the past that many of France's efforts to encourage cross-cultural exchanges have been really geared more towards adults. In the 80s, 70s and 80s, it was a lot of twinning of cities, and there would be delegations that would go. And recently, there's been a lot more discussion about businesses, but those really serve adults. And yet, our people of tomorrow are our students today. And I'm wondering if the consulate or the embassy has thought about creating some programs of international exchange or exposure that would serve our young people.
I could not agree more about the benefits of exchanging youth. This is my number one priority. You can check my website, the website of the consulate, my social media accounts. This is number one priority. I'm visiting schools after schools. If you invite me to come to your school, I will come.
Oh, super. Okay.
Because there is nothing more important than working for the next generation. And this is one of the luxuries that a consulate actually has versus the embassy. The embassy is very much, in Washington, D.C., into politics, trying to figure out what's going on in Washington. And it's not improving. And they are, under the pressure of Paris about Iran, Here, I don't have that pressure. And so I can, with my team, spend more time in meeting teachers, in meeting faculty, in meeting young people to encourage this kind of exchanges. Not only to encourage, but to help you find the right tools. We have existing tools, but I agree some of them should be updated and improved. One thing is missing, for example, if we want to attract more youth, we should be able to help students find internship opportunities in France with French companies or with American companies, and that brings business and youth together. Other aspect is the language. To work with you to make French as a second language more attractive, because sometimes I hear, or too often I hear, well, yes, we are cutting the French language budget because, you know, it's nice, but it's kind of luxury. Today, in the world we live in, we don't need a foreign language, or maybe we need Spanish and only Spanish or Mandarin. There are so many examples that shows that it's a wrong approach. It's a 20th century approach, but not 21st century approach. And the other thing is the immersion programs. I think in the big city like Chicago has 0 French immersion program in public schools. How come? So we will change that. The Twin Cities have 3 programs of this kind. Columbus, Ohio has 1 very successful. Milwaukee has 1. And the thing we are going to do in November is to bring Chicago public schools, principals, staff, hopefully some political assistants as well. Guess where? In Milwaukee, French immersion school, so that they see by themselves how successful it is, how they should be inspired by that. I know it's a challenge to tell Chicago to come to Milwaukee, but we will do that. November 4th.
Any other questions?
Hello. I guess I have a question surrounded around French imperialism, and you know how England has the British Commonwealth of Nations. You know that after economic exploitation, military interventions. How does France interact with its former colonies like Haiti, Vietnam, Algeria?
Excellent question. It makes a bridge with the previous question about the French language. The language French is spoken on all continents, and it has to do with French colonial history. In Africa, in Northern Africa, in Lebanon, in Vietnam, in Haiti, in Guyana, even in Antarctica, but it's not colonization. French is, with English, the only language that is spoken on all continents, and if you look at the number of countries, flags, that have French as their official or administrative language, somewhere between 40 and 50 countries in the world. It's a lot. So we come second after English. Not the number of locutors. Of course, there are more people who speak Mandarin, but in terms of countries, in terms of influence, in terms of geographic diversity is number 1. I'm saying this because this is what unites France and its former colonies. We have an organization called l'Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, OIF, that is much more recent than the Commonwealth, but has similarities with the Commonwealth. It's a global organization with countries or entities that have the French language in partage, as we say, that share the same language. Interestingly, Algeria is not part of OIF because Algeria and France have a very complex history with the War of Independence not so too long ago. And so the relation is complex. But at the same time, Algeria is very, very adamant in defending French language. And while they are not officially member of the OIF, they participate in many events related to Francophonie. So even in the case of France and Algeria, one thing unites us the most is the French language. And so that's good because it's a French without borders. It's a shared heritage. This is our common good. And it's not limited to countries. I consider the United States also a French-speaking country. It's not the official language, it's not a second language, but since there are millions of Americans who either speak French or learn French, are part of the community. It's not a community that is based on citizenship or anything else. The very moment you start learning French, you're part of the French-speaking community. Even if you're not fluent, you are family. And maybe one day Wisconsin will consider to join the Organisation de la Francophonie, as Louisiana did last year, successfully. À vous, Madame, de jouer. Hein?
Any other questions?
Can you explain a little bit about the strikes and demonstrations that go on in your country today?
Today, the main hot issue is our pension system. We spoke about healthcare. Our pension system is working pretty well, and we don't want to change radically, dramatically the system. And I think there is consensus in not changing dramatically. But there are differences. As for the official age of retirement, because the population is getting older, we live longer, and that's good. But at the same time, the money that is needed is bigger, so we need to work longer. And while I think everybody agree with that, everybody would agree that it's good for others, but maybe not for me, and that's a problem. So there's one big question about the age of departure of retirement. The second issue is that President Macron, for the first time ever since the liberation, end of World War II, is trying to make the system homogeneous, with the same rules basically for all professions, with differences, but basically one system and several subsystems. So there are many professions who think they are fine with their small systems, like the lawyers or many different professions, and they are a little bit adverse to change. Maybe because there is a lack of explanation by the government, maybe because they have legitimate worries. I think it's somewhere in between. But this is about that. It's about, I fear about my system, in a way. It's a little bit complex, I'm sorry, but it's, I'm trying to make it as I hope I was clear.
Any other questions? I see somebody here. All right, well,
One last question. I'd like to follow up on the imperialism. I'd like to follow up on the imperialism question a little bit. And it seems I'm curious about the legacy of French imperialism, as far as, on one hand, it probably gives you a lot of skill around the world, a lot of historical memory, and on the other hand, seems like there's a direct line of anger and racial tension with the National Front and the Algerian connection, and then just the demographic integration of North Africa and other countries with France so there seems to be this great antagonism on one hand, but I suspect that you're very skillful diplomatically around the world, partly because of the imperial past.
Sometimes we may be overestimating the legacy of the colonial history when it comes to migrations. It is true that when we think migrants or communities in France, we think Algerians, Moroccans, Tunisians, Malians, so former French colonies. But according to the numbers, the majority of migrants to France do not come from Africa, the newcomers. There are many people who come from Asia. And I think it has also to do with geographic proximity. There are an increasing number of migrants coming from Africa to Italy, to Spain, who are maybe not looking for immigration to Italy or Spain, but because of the proximity, they end up in Spain. While here in America, the immigrants do not come from former colonies, maybe because America was not a colonial power, but I will come back to that. But it has to do with geography. It's the proximity. People are looking for economic opportunities. But right, it probably helps the French diplomatic tradition. The French administration apparatus have a history of working with people from all the corners of the world, and I hope for the best. Like Great Britain, we have, in relative terms, smaller and smaller countries, but we keep universal diplomatic networks. France is the third diplomatic network after America and China. We're trying to have embassies and consulates in all countries. And by tradition, in the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there are speakers of faraway country languages. I'm one of them. I speak Swahili. I have colleagues who speak Chinese, Japanese, and this has been the case since centuries, I believe. And even French fur traders, when they came to this part of America, they learned the local languages. We say you say imperialism. Yes, we used to have a colonial empire. It's been 60 years ago, and I think many, let's say Africans, but also people from other parts of the world who live in these countries or are immigrants in France with French citizenship want really to move on, not to forget the past, not to undermine the bad memories, the things that should have not happened, but really want to see themselves as a French citizens or citizens of the world, and want to look to the future and not so much to the past. France, UK, Belgium used to be colonial powers, and the United States of America was not a colonial power, even if you had few colonies here and there. But imperialism is also about the colonial system. And part of the colonial system was about slave trade and slavery. And America was not at all immune from it. And so this, this memory, this legacy still echoes in France, but also in America, in other countries. And this is why it's so important, I believe, to become global citizens who are aware of the past, but also aware of the need to not to repeat the mistakes of the past and learn from our mistakes.
All right, any other questions? All right, well, then thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And
Merci beaucoup.
we hope to see you next week's talk on French culture. That'll be in 201, and have a UWM professor talking about it, as well as all the other ones. Make sure that you come by for the Matt Zillig Memorial or Feast that's right next door. So thank you again for coming out tonight.